Mornings in Cedar Grove are always quiet, especially on Maple Lane, where I've lived for over 50 years. At 78, I've grown to appreciate the stillness, the way the sun filters through the lace curtains in my living room, and the birds that gather on the porch rail like clockwork. My body doesn't move the way it used to. My knees ache, and my back complains, but I get by. This house, though old and worn, holds every memory of my life with Frank, my late husband. He built the bookshelf in the corner and promised to fix the squeaky front step for years before his heart gave out on a rainy Tuesday 8 years ago. I still talk to him every morning as I water the plants. It's silly, I know, but it comforts me. So our children, Mason and Clara, were raised within these walls. I can still hear their footsteps, their arguments, their laughter echoing in the hallway. These days, Clara visits once a month, always in a hurry, always with a list of errands. Mason stops by more often, but usually for something. A signature, a check, a favor. He always promises to pay it back. He never does. Only Liam, my grandson, comes without an agenda. He's in college now, tall and kind-hearted, always bringing stories and a craving for my blueberry pie. I bake one every Wednesday. Not for me, I can't eat much sugar anymore, but for Liam, who makes me feel remembered. That Wednesday, I heard the front gate swing shut and his familiar footsteps on the porch. He walked with that same gentle awkwardness Frank had at his age. I smiled, already reaching for the tea kettle, unaware that what he'd say next would change everything. "Hi, Grandma," Liam called as he stepped inside, the smell of pie already filling the kitchen. "It's still warm," I said, placing a plate in front of him. "Made it just for you." He grinned and sat down, already digging in. "You really didn't have to." "I wanted to," I said, pouring him a cup of tea. "So, how's school?" He told me about a math project, a professor who finally remembered his name, and a girl named Brooke who liked old poetry as much as he did. He was halfway through his second slice when he asked, "Have you decided what you're going to wear on Friday?" I paused, my hand on the teapot. "Friday?" He looked at me, puzzled. "You know Mom and Dad's anniversary dinner, 35 years. They booked a private room at Riverbend." Something cold washed over me. I tried to smile. "Your father didn't mention anything to me." Liam blinked. "Oh, I just assumed. He told me he'd pick you up." I shook my head gently. No one said a word. He grew quiet. Maybe he forgot. Dad's always last minute. "Maybe," I said, but something inside me had shifted. Later that day, the phone rang. Mason's number lit up the screen. I answered with a smile in my voice, trying to believe there was an explanation. "Hey, Mom," he said, a little too cheerful. "Just wanted to give you a heads up, we're canceling the dinner on Friday. Cora's come down with something. Doctor says bed rest for at least a week." "Oh no," I said, "that's too bad. Do you need anything? I can drop off some soup or—" No, he cut in quickly. "We're covered. Just thought I'd let you know." He hung up before I could respond. I sat there, the dial tone echoing in my ear, my thoughts racing. If dinner was canceled, why hadn't he told me sooner? Why did Liam think it was still on? To clear my mind, I called Clara. She sounded distracted. "Cora's sick," I asked. "Sick?" Clara repeated. I don't know. I haven't talked to her." "But you're coming Friday, right?" A long pause. "Oh, yeah, right, of course." She hung up quickly, too quickly. Something was wrong. Not just forgotten, hidden, intentionally. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my armchair with the photo album on my lap, flipping through the worn pages. Mason at 5, missing a front tooth, proudly holding up a lopsided drawing. Clara on her first bike, Frank standing behind her with both hands outstretched, ready to catch her. Our Christmas dinners, birthdays, summers at the lake. I wondered when it all changed. When did I stop being the center of their world and start becoming a burden they managed? The next morning, I went to the market, not for groceries, just to clear my head. I ran into Martha Jean, a retired school teacher and longtime friend of our family. She worked part-time at the same florist shop as Clara. "Big celebration tomorrow, huh?" she said with a smile. "Clara told me she's taking the evening off. 35 years is a big deal." I stared at her. "Oh, I thought it was canceled." Martha looked puzzled. "No, the reservation's been in for weeks. Private room at Riverbend. Fancy one, too?" I thanked her and walked home slowly, my heart heavy but my mind sharper than it had felt in years. So the dinner was still happening. They had lied. And not just a little white lie. They went out of their way to keep me away. pretended to care, pretended to call. All so I'd stay home, alone, thinking I wasn't forgotten. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just stood in front of the closet and pulled out the dress I hadn't worn since Frank's funeral. Navy blue, simple, dignified. It still fit, though I'd lost weight. I laid it on the bed and looked in the mirror. If they didn't want me there, I said quietly, then I need to see why. Tomorrow I would go. Friday evening arrived cloaked in gray clouds, the kind that made the town of Cedar Grove look even smaller than it was. I stood at my window for a long while holding a cup of untouched tea, thinking about everything and nothing. My dress was pressed and ready. My shoes were clean. I'd even put on a touch of lipstick. At 5 p.m. I called a cab. The driver was a young man with earbuds and tattoos. When I gave him the name of the restaurant Riverbend, he raised an eyebrow. "Swanky place?" he said. "Special occasion?" "Yes," I replied, steady as stone. "Family reunion." He didn't ask more questions. When we arrived, I asked him to stop just short of the main entrance. "Wait here for me," I said. "Just in case." The restaurant stood by the river, all brick and ivy, with twinkling lights already glowing in the windows. I didn't go in through the front. I walked around the side toward the guest parking lot. That's when I saw them. Mason's silver SUV, Clara's beige sedan, Liam's dusty old Honda. All here, all parked. No mistake. I kept walking until I reached a set of windows partially covered with curtains. Through the gap, I saw them. A large round table in the center of the room, champagne flutes raised, Cora beaming in a red dress, perfectly healthy, Mason giving a toast, Clara laughing beside her husband, Liam and his girlfriend. Even a few faces I didn't recognize, friends, probably. They were all there. All of them except me. A knot tightened in my chest, but I didn't cry. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and walked around to the main entrance. At the door stood a tall man in a navy vest with a gold name tag. "Good evening, Mama. Do you have a reservation?" "No," I said, meeting his eyes, "but I believe the Hayes family is celebrating tonight. I'm Eleanor Hayes, Mason's mother." The man blinked. Then his face softened. "Of course, please come in." I stepped inside the lobby, the warm lighting brushing across my face. Everything smelled of rosemary and roast lamb. Just then, a voice called out behind me, "Eleanor?" I turned to see him, Lewis Hartman, owner of Riverbend, and once, many years ago, the boy who lived across the street from us. He'd been quiet, always borrowing books and asking for seconds on pie. He looked older now, with silver in his beard and kindness still in his eyes. "You haven't changed," he said with a smile. "Oh, but I have," I replied, "and apparently so has my family." He looked at me, puzzled, then serious. "Did they not invite you?" "They lied to keep me away." A long pause. "Well," he said, offering his arm, "let's not keep them waiting." I nodded, slipped my hand into his, and together, we walked toward the banquet hall, toward a truth none of them were ready for. The moment Lewis opened the doors to the banquet hall, a hush seemed to ripple through the room. Laughter faded. Silverware paused midair. Conversations froze. We walked slowly, steadily, toward the large round table at the center. I kept my eyes on Mason and Clara. Mason had just finished a toast and was laughing until he saw me. He choked slightly, his face draining of color. Cora's smile faltered. Clara's wine glass trembled in her hand. Liam was the first to react. He stood up quickly, startled. "Grandma?" I gave him a small nod and smile before turning to the rest of them. Mason stood too, pushing out his chair in a fluster. "Mom, you're here. You said you weren't feeling well." "No," I said evenly. "You told me the dinner was canceled. You said Cora was sick. But here she is looking quite radiant." Cora blinked. I felt better this morning." "How miraculous," I replied, glancing around the table. "So many healthy faces for a canceled celebration." The room went silent again. All eyes locked on me. Lewis, ever the gentleman, pulled out a chair between Liam and a woman I didn't recognize. I sat down calmly, folding my hands in my lap. "I didn't come to ruin your evening," I said. "I came to see it for myself. I needed to be sure it wasn't a mistake, that you hadn't simply forgotten. But no, you planned it this way. You lied to keep me away." Clara opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. "I'm speaking now." I reached into my purse and pulled out a white envelope, setting it gently on the table. "I brought a few things with me, just in case." Mason's eyes darted to the envelope, suspicion rising. This, I said, sliding the first document forward, is confirmation that I sold the house 3 days ago. The one you were both so eager for me to sign over. It's gone now, to a young couple with 2 small kids. They'll breathe new life into it. Clara gasped. Mason's mouth fell open. And this, I said, pulling out a second document, is a donation confirmation. The money from the sale, nearly $500,000, has been given to Cedar Grove Public Library. They're naming the new children's wing after your father, Frank Hayes. He loved that library. Someone across the table dropped a fork. Liam stared at me, wide-eyed. Grandma. I'm not finished, I said gently, and placed the final document down. My revised will. What little remains savings, belongings goes to Liam. The only person at this table who ever visited me because he wanted to, not because he needed something. Mason's face flushed red. Cora stared down at the tablecloth. Clara looked like she might cry. I looked at them all, not with anger, not with hatred, but with clarity. You wanted a party without me, I said, and now you have one. But you also have the truth. What you choose to do with it, that's up to you. For a moment, no one at the table said a word. You could have heard the faint clink of a spoon from across the room. Mason looked as if he were about to speak, but he couldn't seem to find the right words. Clara stared into her glass like she was searching for an escape at the bottom of it. Cora looked anywhere but at me. Only Liam met my eyes. Grandma, he said softly, I didn't know. I swear I thought you'd been invited. I know, sweetheart, I replied, placing my hand on his gently. This isn't about you. Mason finally cleared his throat. Mom, I think we should talk about this, just not here. Let's go somewhere private. We can explain. No, I said. You've done enough explaining. I heard the lies. I saw the truth with my own eyes. I don't need more words. I need respect. Clara looked up, voice trembling. We didn't mean to hurt you. But you did, I said, steady and calm, and I let it happen for far too long. I stood smoothing my dress, suddenly aware of how tall I felt, not because of height, but because I was no longer small in their eyes or mine. You taught me, each of you, that love can fade when it's not convenient. But I've learned something too. I've learned that love without dignity isn't love at all. It's dependence. And I'm done depending. So Liam started to rise as if to walk me out, but I shook my head gently. Stay. Enjoy the evening. You deserve to be here. I turned to Lewis, who had been watching from the distance with a soft, quiet expression. Would you mind calling that cab again? I asked him. Already did, he said, stepping forward with a hint of a smile. It's waiting outside. As I walked away from the table, the silence behind me said more than their words ever could. For the first time in decades, I wasn't chasing anyone's approval. I wasn't hoping to be chosen. I had chosen myself. And I was finally free. 3 months have passed since that night at Riverbend. The sky outside my new apartment glows with the gentle gold of spring, and from my 3rd-floor window, I can see the town square coming to life. Children dart across the grass. Couples walk hand in hand past the old fountain. And across the street stands the Cedar Grove Public Library with a brand new wing bearing Frank's name. My life is different now, smaller, simpler, but lighter. I volunteer at the library 3 mornings a week, mostly in the children's section. I read to toddlers, help grade schoolers pick their first novels, and sometimes just listen when teenagers come in needing someone to talk to. No one there cares what I own or what I left behind. They just see me, as I am. Mason calls now. At first it was daily, then every few days, always with a softer voice than before. Clara came by once, brought flowers from her shop, and stayed for tea. She didn't say much, just looked around the apartment like she was trying to understand how I had built something without them. I don't shut them out, but I don't let them in too easily either. Trust is not something I give away anymore. It has to be earned. The money's gone, and I think they've finally accepted it. The donations were finalized, the contracts signed. There's nothing left for them to chase, just me, their mother, if they want that. Lewis has become something of a friend. He stops by the library on quiet afternoons with a cup of chai and stories from the restaurant. We've gone to the community theater twice, and once he even invited me to dinner with his sister. Nothing more than companionship, but for the first time in years, I've allowed someone new into my circle. Someone who asks nothing of me but my company. As I sip my tea by the window, a breeze carries the scent of blooming jasmine through the screen. It smells like a beginning. Not every ending is bitter. Some simply close the chapter so the next one can finally begin. And this is mine. Today is a special day. At 3 sharp, Liam arrives at my door, wearing a tie that's slightly crooked and holding a bouquet of lilies he picked up on the way. "You ready for your big moment, Grandma?" he grins. I laugh, smoothing my navy blue dress, the same one I wore that night. "It's not a big moment, Liam. Just a ribbon and a plaque." "No," he says. "It's more than that. It's a legacy." When we arrive at the library, the crowd is already gathering. The mayor is shaking hands. Volunteers are adjusting folding chairs and passing out lemonade. I see familiar faces, neighbors, students, librarians, even parents whose children I now read to. And there, near the entrance to the new wing, covered in a silky cloth, is the golden plaque, the Frank Hayes Children's Wing. Miss Patterson, the head librarian, waves us over. "Eleanor, everyone's been waiting for you." The ceremony begins with speeches. The mayor says something about community spirit. Miss Patterson talks about dreams and generosity, and then she calls me to the podium. I take a deep breath. "Thank you all," I begin. "This wing is named after my husband, Frank, who believed in the magic of stories and the power of education. He read to our children every night, even when he was tired. He believed that a well-loved book could change a child's life." I look out at the audience. I spot Mason and Clara standing near the back. Clara gives me a small nod. Mason's eyes are downcast. My hope is that this place becomes a sanctuary for children to learn, to wonder, to grow. Because life isn't measured by what you own, it's measured by what you give. The crowd applauds. Liam helps me cut the ribbon. Cameras flash. The cloth is pulled back. There it is, Frank's name, gleaming in the sunlight. As the crowd disperses, Louis appears beside me, holding 2 paper cups of lemonade. "To beginnings," he says. "To choosing yourself," I reply. And that's exactly what I've done. I don't know what comes next. I don't know if Mason and Clara will ever understand how much they hurt me, but I'm no longer waiting for that. I'm no longer waiting for anything. Because this life, it's mine now. And I intend to live every last page of it on my own terms. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like, share, and leave a comment. Because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to walk away and begin again.
The slap landed before I had time to react. My glasses flew across the polished ballroom floor, shattering under the weight of silence. 130 guests froze in place, their laughter cut off like a record needle lifted mid-song. My cheek stung, but the pain in my chest cut deeper. Standing before me, her wedding gown flawless under the chandeliers, Sloane Carter glared. "That's what you get for being so selfish," she hissed. "A woman your age doesn't need so much space." My apartment keys, the only thing she wanted, dangled between us like bait. Not a single voice rose in my defense. Some guests whispered, others turned their faces away, embarrassed to watch. My son Noah lowered his eyes, frozen in shame or cowardice, I couldn't tell which. I crouched to gather my broken glasses, hands trembling, tears stinging. Yet beneath the humiliation, something steadier stirred inside me. This slap was not just an insult. It was the end of pretending. My name is Clara Whitman. I am 68 years old, and tonight my silence ended. Most people saw me as a widow living on a modest pension, a woman who drove an old sedan and wore thrift store sweaters. I worked 3 days a week at Bay Street Florals, arranging roses and lilies for customers who rarely knew my name. To Sloane, I was an outdated burden, a fragile woman clinging to independence she didn't deserve. But appearances are deceiving. My husband Daniel, who passed 10 years ago, had never been the ordinary office worker people thought he was. Together we had built a small import business that quietly grew into something far greater. Investments in a downtown office building, steady index funds, and even a weathered coastal property turned rental, all of it carefully hidden behind the curtain of simplicity. We made a pact early in our marriage. Visible wealth attracts noise. Invisible wealth buys freedom. We chose the second path. I drove an old car because it ran well. I wore simple clothes because I valued comfort. And I kept working at the flower shop because I loved it, not because I needed to. No one in that ballroom, least of all Sloane, understood that the woman they thought powerless had resources, choices, and strength they could not imagine. I still remember the first evening Noah brought Sloane to meet me. Her smile was bright, but her eyes wandered. She barely noticed the meal I had prepared. Instead, she studied the apartment like a real estate agent on a mission. Her gaze lingered on the size of the living room, the balcony view over the harbor, the security system near the door. She called the space cozy, though her tone suggested the opposite. From that night forward, Sloane's words always carried hidden barbs. Clara, senior communities have emergency cords in every room. It would be so much safer for you. Or Noah, your mom deserves a smaller place, don't you think? Each comment sounded polite, but the message was sharp. She wanted my home. One afternoon she arrived with a glossy stack of brochures for retirement facilities. She spread them across my coffee table like a poker hand. The pages were highlighted, circles around costs and amenities. Just options, she insisted with a practiced smile. I nodded, but inside I filed it away. This was no accident, it was strategy. I changed the subject to weather and gardening, and I noticed something. Her lips tightened, just for a moment, when she realized she hadn't steered the conversation. That flicker told me everything. Sloane wasn't just a daughter-in-law trying to help. She was a woman mapping out her next possession, and I was standing in the way. 2 weeks before the wedding, Sloane came to my apartment with an entourage. She did not arrive alone. Her parents, Grant and Marissa, followed behind her, and Noah trailed quietly at the end. I felt the trap before they even sat down. They chose my living room like it was a conference table. Marissa crossed her legs, smoothing her designer skirt, while Grant glanced around with the eyes of a man sizing up property. Sloane cleared her throat. "Clara, we wanted to talk about your future," she began, her tone syrupy sweet. My stomach tightened. Grant leaned forward. "At your age, living alone in such a large space is unnecessary and frankly unsafe. What if you fell and no one knew?" His words were too rehearsed, polished as if they had practiced them in the car. Noah finally spoke, his voice small. "Mom, they're right. Maybe it's time to think about moving somewhere more appropriate." The words landed heavier than any slap. Appropriate for my age. Decided by whom? Then Marissa delivered the heart of their plan. If you sell this apartment, you could cover the cost of a lovely senior residence and still have funds left to help Noah and Sloane start their marriage strong. It was theater, and every actor knew their lines. But I asked one question they hadn't rehearsed for. So the apartment would be perfect for them, wouldn't it? Silence filled the room, thick and awkward. Their eyes told me the answer. When they left, I sat alone in the quiet and let the tears come. They thought they had cornered me, but they had only lit the fuse. That night, I made a call I had hoped I would never need to make. Amaya Rhodes, an old friend who had worked in real estate for decades, still picked up the phone on the second ring. "Amaya, I need you to find out everything you can about Noah and Sloane's finances," I whispered, my voice shaking. She didn't ask why, she only promised to get back to me. A week later, the truth landed like ice water. Their wedding wasn't funded by savings or generosity from the Carter family. It was stacked on credit cards and personal loans. Their apartment rent was months behind. Both luxury cars parked in their driveway were financed beyond reason. Sloane's consulting work brought in pennies, yet her expenses screamed of excess. And worse, Amaya discovered inquiries Noah himself had made asking banks how to leverage my apartment for loans, even researching power of attorney procedures for seniors. The final detail twisted the knife. A private investigator overheard Sloane on the phone bragging to a friend. "Once we move her out, we'll be set. She'll probably even thank us for helping." That night I pulled out a brown folder from my desk and labeled it with a single word: winter. Because for Noah and Sloane, the season of easy living was about to end. The night before the wedding, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. In front of me lay Daniel's old leather notebook, the one where he wrote small reminders and thoughts. On the first page, in his neat handwriting, were 5 words: "Strength doesn't shout, it stands." I read that line again and again, until it sank into my bones. I realized I had been shouting silently for months, through tears, through exhaustion, through prayers. But now it was time to stand. I picked up the phone and called Victor Hale, the attorney who had handled our family business for years. "Victor," I said, my voice steady for the first time in months, "prepare the documents. Freeze the transfers. Cancel the guarantees. Amend the will. Tomorrow may be ugly, but it will be honest." He paused only a moment before answering, "Understood." That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. The decision had been made. The ballroom at Elmwood Hall glowed with chandeliers and music when the blow finally came. One sharp slap across my cheek, the sting of glass shattering on marble, and a hush so heavy it pressed against my skin. Sloane stood tall in her wedding gown, venom dripping from her words. "Give me the keys, Clara. That apartment will serve us better than you." Gasps rippled through the crowd, but no one moved. Noah, my son, lowered his eyes, his hands buried in his pockets as though hiding from the truth. I gathered the broken pieces of my glasses, each shard cutting more than the last, and rose with trembling dignity. Without another word, I turned and walked out beneath the chandeliers. In the parking lot, the cool night air steadied me. My fingers found my phone inside my worn purse. "Victor," I said when he answered, "Elmwood Hall. 30 minutes. Bring everything." Before I ended the call, I asked one more favor. I dialed Mr. Thomas Ridley, my neighbor of 20 years. "Thomas, can you fetch the brown folder from my desk? The one marked Winter. Bring it to me here." He didn't ask questions. He simply said, "On my way." The stage had been set. Their celebration would soon become a reckoning. I sat in my car beneath the yellow glow of the streetlights, the chill of the leather seat pressing against my back. My hands trembled, but not from fear this time, it was resolve. 20 minutes later, headlights swept across the lot. Victor Hale stepped out, a slim briefcase tucked under his arm, his tie slightly loosened from the rush. "Clara," he said softly, "are you certain? Once we take this step, there's no turning back." I opened the brown folder Thomas had just delivered and placed it on the hood of my car. Inside lay years of records, bank transfers, property deeds, investment statements. Proof of the life Daniel and I had built quietly. Proof of how much I had already done for Noah without his knowledge. I signed document after document under Victor's watchful eye. An order halting every monthly transfer into Noah's accounts. A cancellation of the lease guarantee I had been secretly covering. A formal amendment to my will, redirecting inheritance toward the Whitman Fund for Senior Dignity. When I finished, Victor gathered the papers. I looked him in the eye. "Ring the bell, Victor. It's time." My voice did not shake. The ballroom doors opened and every head turned. The music faltered, then stopped. Victor walked beside me, his briefcase in hand, his voice calm but commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I apologize for the interruption, but there are urgent matters concerning Mr. Noah Whitman and Mrs. Sloane Carter." A hush fell so deep I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Sloane stiffened, her hands clutching her bouquet. "Clara," she spat, "what are you doing back here? You've caused enough drama tonight." But the edge in her voice betrayed nerves. Victor opened the folder and removed the first document. Effective immediately, the financial guarantee Mrs. Whitman provided for Noah's lease has been revoked. The landlord will be notified tomorrow morning. 30 days to vacate or secure a new guarantor. Noah's face drained of color. "Financial guarantee?" he whispered, glancing at me with dawning horror. Victor's tone remained steady. "Also terminated are the monthly transfers, $4,500 a month for rent, car insurance and credit cards. Those funds came directly from your mother's accounts." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Guests exchanged looks of shock as Sloane's lips parted in disbelief. "That's a lie," she shrieked. "Look at her, she works in a flower shop. She drives a 10-year-old car. She doesn't have money." Murmurs grew louder, cell phones lifted to record. Victor raised one last paper. "And finally, the financial guarantee for this very celebration has been cancelled. The ballroom retains the right to demand payment before the event continues." The silence shattered into chaos. Guests whispered, some edging toward the exits, uncertain whether the party would even continue. The manager of Elmwood Hall appeared near the stage, his jaw tight. I stepped forward, my voice steady. "Noah, who brought an appraiser to my building without telling me? Who asked banks about loans against my home? Who stood silent when your wife slapped me?" He had no words. His shoulders sagged, his eyes wet. Victor closed the folder with a snap. "Miss Whitman has also amended her will. Assets once promised to her son will now support organizations that protect seniors from family exploitation." Sloane's scream cut through the ballroom, wild and raw. "You can't do this for your family." I met her gaze without blinking. Family is not built on greed. Kindness is not consent. Tonight you learned the difference. The ballroom erupted into a storm of whispers and shifting chairs. Some guests slipped quietly toward the exits, unwilling to be part of a scandal. Others lingered, their eyes locked on Noah and Sloane as if watching a stage play unravel. The manager stood with folded arms near the stage, waiting for someone to take responsibility for the bill. I turned from the chaos, the weight of silence replaced by a strange calm. Outside, the night air wrapped around me like a shield. Thomas Ridley caught up to me by the doors and placed a warm hand on my shoulder. "You did what needed to be done, Clara," he said firmly. "Don't doubt it for a second." Over the next 3 days, the calls and messages came in waves. Noah's voicemail shifted from anger to pleading 37 in total. Sloane's texts arrived at odd hours, dripping with panic and blame. Twice, her parents showed up at my door, demanding that I undo the damage. But each time, I simply repeated the same words: my decision stands. For once, the strength in my voice belonged wholly to me. I should have expected that Sloane would not surrender quietly. Within a week, whispers began circling in the neighborhood. She told anyone who would listen that I was unstable, that the scene at the wedding proved I had lost my grip on reality. According to her, I was an old woman lashing out at a young couple's happiness. Then came the notice from Victor. Noah had filed a preliminary petition in court, questioning my competency to manage my own affairs. Attached were sworn statements from a handful of wedding guests people Sloane had convinced with selective retellings. They described me as irrational, vengeful, emotionally volatile. Reading those words was like swallowing glass. But the tide turned in an unexpected way. Several guests had recorded the wedding confrontation on their phones. Clips spread quickly online. The world didn't see a confused old widow. They saw a woman holding her ground with dignity while exposing years of manipulation. Comments poured in, stories from strangers who had endured similar abuse, praise for boundaries I had set. The very act meant to discredit me had placed a spotlight on the truth. Sloane's campaign had given me something she never intended: a public voice. The day of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse with Victor by my side. My palms were damp, but my steps were steady. Across the aisle, Sloane clutched Noah's arm, her face painted in calm determination, though her eyes betrayed fear. She believed her petition would paint me as erratic. She underestimated the weight of evidence. Victor presented documents showing months of bank transfers from my accounts to Noah's. He displayed records of Sloane bringing an appraiser to my apartment, emails inquiring about loans against my property, and notes from the investigator who overheard her phone call. Piece by piece, their plan unraveled under the fluorescent lights. The judge dismissed their petition as frivolous, ordering them to pay my attorney fees. The blow was financial, but the humiliation was far worse. Soon after, a producer from Cityline Stories contacted Victor. "Your client's case resonates," she said. "People need to hear it." 2 weeks later, I sat beneath the studio lights across from host Nora Patel. She didn't ask for gossip. She asked about patterns of control, about how emotional abuse begins quietly. I leaned toward the camera and said, "Boundaries protect love from turning into leverage." That line would follow me everywhere. 2 years have passed since that night at Elmwood Hall, and my life is unrecognizable. The Whitman Fund for Senior Dignity, created from the inheritance I once set aside for Noah, now supports free legal clinics and counseling for older adults facing family exploitation. Mr. Ridley, my neighbor, serves as volunteer coordinator, and Amaya Rhodes leads workshops called Know Your Deed, teaching seniors how to protect their homes. My days are fuller than ever. I tend the community garden behind our building, teaching neighbors how to grow herbs and vegetables. I spend mornings at the foundation offices, afternoons meeting with families who need guidance. My health has improved, my sleep is peaceful, and for the first time in years, I feel younger than my age. Noah reached out 3 times in these 2 years. Each time his request was for money, never for forgiveness. I answered none of them. Instead, I created a trust fund for his son, my grandson Owen. When he turns 18, he will receive it directly, free from the weight of his parents' mistakes. That is my gift to him, a chance to start clean. Looking back, I realized the story was never just about me. It was about what can happen when love is mistaken for entitlement, when kindness is confused with weakness. The lessons I carry now are simple, but they were earned with pain. First, document patterns, not just blow-ups. My winter folder told the story no one could deny. Second, separate help from enablement. By secretly covering Noah's bills, I kept him from facing reality until it was too late. Third, use professionals early. Victor and Amaya shifted the balance from isolation to strategy. Fourth, public composure is power. In that ballroom, Sloane screamed. I stayed calm. The world noticed. And finally, boundaries can be love. My grandson's trust is proof. I cut off his parents, but I left a path for him. These lessons are not theories, they are lived truths. They remind me every day that dignity is not a luxury. It is the foundation for every relationship worth keeping. If this story echoed something in your own life, remember you are not alone. Share it with someone who needs courage today. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read them all. And if you want more stories of quiet strength and lessons hard-earned, Please like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these voices alive. My name is Marjorie Caldwell. I am 67 years old, a widow, and the sole keeper of a fortune I never asked for but inherited when my husband Richard passed away. For decades we built a life together around his technology company, and when he died, the entire empire, worth billions, landed in my lap. I thought my greatest challenge would be learning how to live without him. I was wrong. The greatest challenge turned out to be surviving my own family. It began with a phone call from my son Stephen. He rarely called me directly anymore. Most of the time, if he wanted to talk about anything, it came through his assistant or his wife, Victoria. But on that Tuesday morning he called himself. His voice was warm, almost too warm, and he said, "Mom, we want to celebrate you. Victoria and I were thinking of taking you on the yacht this afternoon. Just us three. We can toast to your recovery after the hip surgery." I should have paused. I should have wondered why the sudden affection, but I was lonely, still healing, and desperate to believe that my son wanted me close again. Since Richard died, Stephen had grown colder, more distant, almost impatient with me. So when he offered a day together on his new yacht, I chose to ignore the quiet warning in my chest. I dressed carefully in the navy blue dress Richard always said brought out my eyes, and I took a cab to the marina. The yacht was gleaming, 40 feet of luxury. Stephen hugged me at the dock. It felt rehearsed, like a gesture for an audience that was not there. Victoria stood waiting on deck, her smile as sharp as glass. "Ain't she beautiful?" Stephen asked, gesturing at the yacht. 42 feet of pure freedom. He did not mention that the boat was paid for with the $3 million I had given him last year for his consulting firm. Money, I was starting to realize, that never saw the inside of any office. We set out to sea, the Massachusetts coastline shrinking behind us. The air was crisp, the waves calm. For an hour, it almost felt like family. Victoria served mimosas, and Stephen talked about their plans to renovate the house, my old house, which I had signed over to them after Richard died. They spoke as if everything in my life was theirs to inherit already. At first I smiled and listened, but then Stephen leaned forward. He began asking about my will, about the trust, about whether I had considered simplifying things. "Probate can be complicated, Mom," he said with too much enthusiasm. "We just want to make sure everything is taken care of." That was when I noticed Victoria with her phone, not taking selfies but angling the camera so it captured me drinking, me speaking about money, me looking tired. They were building a case. My stomach tightened. I saw the trap unfolding. Still, I tried to keep my voice calm. "Stephen," I said, "take me back to shore." His face changed, the warmth gone, his eyes cold as stone. "I am afraid that is not going to happen, Mom." The words hung in the salty air like a death sentence. Before I could react, Victoria stepped closer, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "You have been so forgetful lately, Marjorie. We worry about you, about your memory. We have doctors who agree you are no longer able to manage your affairs." She said it like a fact, like the whole world had already signed off on my decline. I knew what was happening. They had been laying the groundwork for months, little things that seemed harmless at the time. Asking me to sign papers after my surgery, handling my medications, recording me when I was tired or confused. They had been building a case to make me look unfit, and now they wanted me to hand over everything with my signature. Stephen produced a folder thick with documents. "Sign these, Mom. It is for your own protection." I looked at the papers, then at my son, the same boy I once taught to ride a bike, whose scraped knees I had kissed, whose college tuition I had paid. His eyes were ice. I refused. That was when Victoria leaned close, her whisper slicing through me like a blade. "Say hi to the sharks." And with one quick shove, I was overboard. The Atlantic swallowed me whole. Cold water closed over my head, shocking my body, dragging at my clothes. I kicked hard, breaking the surface, gasping, just in time to see the yacht speeding away. Stephen's voice carried faintly over the water, calling my name as if it were an accident, while Victoria spoke calmly into her phone. The image seared itself into me. They were leaving me to die. The ocean was relentless. My limbs grew heavy, and for a moment, I thought perhaps they would succeed. But Richard had taught me to swim years ago, insisting it was a skill that could save my life one day. I clung to that memory, forcing my arms and legs to move. Each stroke was agony, but it was life. Then, through blurred vision, I saw it. A fishing boat. The The Molly Sue, a man with weathered skin and strong arms, was pointing, shouting to someone younger beside him. They hauled me aboard, my body shaking, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. The man dropped a thick blanket around my shoulders. "Holy hell, lady, what happened to you?" he asked. My voice cracked as I whispered, "My family. They left me. They want me dead." The captain's eyes darkened with a kind of anger I had not seen in years. "You are safe here," he said. "My name is Jack Morrison. This is my grandson, Tyler. You rest now, we will figure this out." Wrapped in salt-scented wool, with the Atlantic still dripping from my hair, I realized something powerful. My son believed I was gone, and maybe that was my greatest weapon. If I was dead to him, then I could return on my own terms. Captain Jack and Tyler took me to shore under the cover of dusk, steering their boat toward a quiet cove that only locals seemed to know. They brought me to a small bed and breakfast run by a woman named Mrs. Chen. She took one look at me, drenched and trembling, and without asking questions put a pot of soup on the stove. Some people carry kindness in their bones. She was one of them. I needed time to think, to plan, to understand just how far Stephen and Victoria had gone. I asked Mrs. Chen if she had internet access, and by that night I was reading news articles about myself. "Prominent widow lost at sea," the headline said. The articles painted a picture of a frail old woman whose memory had been slipping for months. They quoted Stephen talking about how forgetful I had become. They described Victoria's tearful worry. There was even a photograph of me at a party, holding a drink and looking slightly bewildered. I remembered that night it was a surprise party Stephen had not told me about. I was startled, not confused. But in the photo I looked like someone lost. They were rewriting my story in real time. The obituary hit me hardest. Marjorie Caldwell, beloved wife of the late Richard Caldwell and mother of Stephen Caldwell, passed away in a tragic boating accident. They had already buried me on paper. Donations requested to the Alzheimer's Association. Even in their lies, they made sure to remind the world of my supposed mental decline. 4 days later, the funeral took place. I could not resist. Hidden behind a shed with a pair of binoculars Jack had lent me, I watched as mourners gathered around a gleaming casket that held nothing but emptiness. Stephen and Victoria stood at the center, dressed in perfect black, accepting condolences like professional actors. People wept, neighbors, old friends, even my doctor. It struck me then how cruel the performance was. These people truly grieved for me, and Stephen and Victoria soaked up their sympathy like it was sunlight. But I noticed something else. Certain people were missing. My lawyer, my accountant, my financial advisor, people who should have been there if only out of respect. Their absence burned in my mind. It felt like a clue, like they were not absent by accident but because they were part of something much darker. That evening, with Jack's help, I returned to the house I had once called home. It sat on Beacon Hill, grand and silent, but when I stepped inside with my old key, I knew at once it was not empty. The refrigerator was stocked with fresh food. The furniture had been updated, expensive pieces that reeked of new money. Someone was living here. My son had moved into my life as if I had never existed. I crept to Richard's old study, the place where he used to pore over contracts late at night. The desk was covered with papers, some stacked neatly, others spread across the surface. I put on the gloves Jack had given me and began to flip through them. What I found stopped my breath. A thick folder labeled The Caldwell Project. Page after page documented my supposed decline. Doctor's notes highlighting confusion. Photographs of me looking disoriented. Records of missed appointments, misplaced items, muddled conversations. Except I knew the truth. These moments were orchestrated. They had set me up again and again to look incompetent. But one paper chilled me more than all the others. A note signed only with initials --m.t. The timeline must be accelerated. She has been asking too many questions. If she seeks independent counsel, everything falls apart. Recommend moving to Phase 3 within 2 weeks. Phase 3 was circled in red. And in the margin, one word: termination. My knees nearly gave out. They had a code name for killing me. They had advisors. They had help. I snapped photos of every page with a disposable camera, my hands shaking with fury. And then I froze. A sound echoed through the house, not the front door, not footsteps. A cry, soft, fragile, unmistakable, a baby crying. I followed the sound, heart pounding, until I stood in the hallway outside the guest bedroom. Through the door I heard it again, the cry of an infant. My son and his wife had never mentioned children. They had never wanted them. And yet here was the undeniable proof. My old home now held a secret far darker than forged papers. There was a child inside, and I suddenly understood. This was not only about money. Something much bigger was at play. I slipped out of the house that night with my heart beating like a drum. The sound of that baby's cry haunted me. I returned to Mrs. Chen's kitchen and spread out the photographs I had taken of the documents. Jack sat across from me, his brow furrowed, while Mrs. Chen poured steaming tea that neither of us touched. There was one page in particular that made my blood run cold, a birth certificate tucked among the papers. It claimed that 3 weeks earlier, Stephen and Victoria Caldwell had welcomed a child, a boy named Robert Caldwell Jr. The certificate bore official stamps and signatures, but the memory of Victoria on that yacht was burned into my mind. 4 days earlier she had been sleek, polished, her figure trim, her posture perfect. She had not looked like a woman who had given birth 3 weeks prior. The certificate was a lie. Jack leaned over the paper, shaking his head. So whose baby is in that house? That was the question. The next morning Mrs. Chen made a call to a man she trusted. A private investigator named Daniel Crawford arrived by noon, a man in his 50s with sharp eyes and the kind of steady presence that made you believe he had seen the worst and survived it. He studied the documents in silence, flipping from one to the next, before finally speaking. Whoever this MT is, they are orchestrating a full-scale operation. And that baby is the center of it now. Daniel began to dig. Within 48 hours he returned with findings that left me breathless. Stephen and Victoria had been visiting a discreet facility in Boston called Whitmore Reproductive Services. On the surface it was a fertility clinic for wealthy couples, but Daniel's sources revealed another truth. Whitmore specialized in surrogacy arrangements that blurred ethical lines, matching desperate young women with wealthy clients who wanted complete secrecy. And then Daniel slid a file across the table. Inside was a name, Sarah Collins, 17 years old. From Maine. A runaway with no family. She had carried a child for Whitmore under the promise of a new life and $50,000. She had delivered the baby 3 weeks ago, and then, according to the medical records, she had died of sudden complications during childbirth. But Daniel had spoken to a nurse who had been there that day. Sarah was healthy, strong, with no risk factors. She had shown no signs of distress until a woman named Miranda Torres entered the delivery room. The same initials, MT. She claimed she was administering a routine medication. Minutes later, Sarah was gone. I felt the room tilt around me. A young girl was dead, her baby now living in my home, held up as proof of Stephen and Victoria's growing family and as justification for their inheritance. They had not only tried to erase me, they had helped erase a mother. Jack broke the silence first. They bought that baby. Mrs. Chen's voice trembled with anger, and they killed the girl who gave him life. I pressed a hand against my chest, trying to steady my breathing. This was no longer only about me or my fortune. It was about justice for Sarah Collins, for the baby who had lost his mother before he even knew her face. I looked at the stack of evidence and made my decision. If Stephen and Victoria wanted to play this game, then I would play it too. Only I was no longer a grieving widow. I was a woman with nothing to lose, and I was ready to fight. The idea came to me in the quiet hours of the night. My son and his wife believed I was gone, claimed by the sea. That illusion gave me power. If I returned openly, they would rally their allies, cover their tracks, and deny everything. But if I let them believe in ghosts, if I unsettled their certainty, I could drive them into mistakes. What they had done to me was cruel, but what they had done to that young girl, Sarah, was unforgivable. They needed to feel fear not of the law, not yet, but of me. Daniel agreed. Psychological warfare, he called it. A way to shake their confidence. Jack simply smiled and said, "I like the sound of that." Mrs. Chen folded her arms. "Just do not underestimate them. Fear makes people dangerous." We set the plan in motion on the very day Stephen and Victoria were scheduled to meet Miranda Torres at her downtown office. While they sat in polished chairs believing they were finalizing paperwork for my estate, a courier walked in with an envelope. Inside, written on my own stationery in my careful hand, was a single note. "Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. We need to talk. Love, Mom. P.S. The baby is beautiful." Daniel watched from across the street as the three of them bolted from the office, pale and shaken. Their confidence had cracked. That was step 1. Step 2 required courage. When they returned to my old house later that afternoon, they found me sitting in the living room, in the very armchair Richard had once given me for our anniversary. I had positioned myself so that the first thing they saw when the door opened was me alive, calm, waiting. Victoria screamed, her voice raw with disbelief. Stephen froze, his keys still dangling in his hand, his mouth open as if words had deserted him. "Hello, darlings," I said softly. "How was your meeting? Did you sign anything important in my absence?" For a long moment, no one moved. Then Carol Peterson, the young nurse they had hired to care for the baby, stepped from the kitchen carrying the infant. She looked uncertain, her eyes darting between us. "Mrs. Caldwell asked me to bring him out," she said nervously. She wanted to meet her grandson properly. The child cooed in her arms, his small face innocent, untouched by the lies surrounding him. My heart clenched as I reached for him, holding him close. "Hello, little one." I whispered his true name in my mind, Robert Sarah, after the grandfather who had built our family and the girl who had given him life. Victoria found her voice sharp and brittle. "That is not your grandson, he is ours. His name is whatever we decide." "Is he?" I asked quietly, rocking the child gently. "Tell me, Victoria, when exactly did you give birth? Because 4 days ago on that yacht you did not look like a woman recovering from childbirth." The silence that followed was heavier than the ocean itself. They knew, and they knew I knew. The haunting had begun. The silence was broken by the sound of a car pulling up outside, tires on gravel, doors shutting, voices low but purposeful. Right on time, Miranda Torres had arrived. Stephen's eyes flickered with both relief and dread. Victoria straightened her shoulders as though summoning courage. I remained seated, the baby resting in Carol's arms now, safe in the corner. The front door opened and in walked a woman in her 40s with sharp auburn hair and an expensive leather portfolio tucked under her arm. She looked like any successful attorney in Boston, polished, professional, harmless. But I knew better. This was the woman who had turned death into a business. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said smoothly, as if greeting an acquaintance at a charity gala. "I am glad you survived your boating accident. We have much to discuss." Her calmness almost unnerved me. I let her sit, let her open her portfolio, let her talk about legal transitions as if she were selling me life insurance. She spoke of probate, guardianship, and the supposed complications of my estate. She made it sound so rational, so civilized. Murder dressed in legal language. I listened, nodding occasionally, and then asked, "How many families have you helped this way?" She tilted her head. "We prefer to call it compassionate intervention. Over the past 5 years, I have resolved 37 cases. All elderly, all struggling, all in need of dignity." 37 lives stolen, I said flatly. Torres smiled. 37 families relieved of burdens they could no longer carry. Stephen and Victoria sat frozen, their faces pale. I glanced at them, then back at her. "And you were planning to make me 38. Torres shut her portfolio with a soft click. "You are well informed, Mrs. Caldwell. That makes you dangerous, which is why we cannot allow this to continue." That was the cue. From every doorway, every window, figures rushed in. Agents in dark jackets, weapons drawn, voices commanding. "FBI, Miranda Torres, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, elder abuse, and racketeering." Chaos erupted. Torres tried to run, but an agent tackled her to the hardwood floor. Stephen sank into the sofa, his face in his hands. Victoria muttered protests, insisting it was all a mistake, but her voice cracked under the weight of her guilt. I sat perfectly still, watching the storm I had helped summon. For days they had believed me dead, powerless, erased. Now they saw me for what I truly was, alive, relentless, and no longer afraid. Agent Sarah Chen approached, offering a firm nod. "Mrs. Caldwell, that was incredibly dangerous, but you did well. We have what we need." I exhaled, a breath I felt I had been holding since the day of the yacht. The trap had closed. Torres was in custody. Stephen and Victoria were exposed, and the baby, innocent, blameless, was safe in Carol's arms. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I had nearly forgotten: hope. The days that followed were a blur of hearings, testimonies, and endless paperwork. The FBI built their case quickly. Miranda Torres faced trial for orchestrating a network that had preyed on wealthy seniors for years. Her conviction was swift and final: life in prison without parole. Her carefully constructed empire of lies collapsed in weeks. Stephen and Victoria were charged with conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to murder. When confronted with the evidence, the recordings, the forged documents, the testimony of Carol and Daniel, they had little room to escape. Stephen accepted a plea deal for 25 years. Victoria received 20. Both are serving their sentences now, a long way from the luxury they once chased. But the true center of this story was the baby. In court, I explained his origins, presenting Sarah Collins's name with reverence. I told the judge that the child's mother had been a brave young woman who deserved to be remembered. I adopted him legally, naming him Robert Sarah Caldwell, to honor both his grandfather and the mother who gave her life bringing him into the world. 5 years have passed. Robert is no longer an infant but a curious little boy with wide brown eyes and a smile that can soften any day. He knows his story in pieces suitable for his age, that his birth mother was young and kind, that she wanted him to have a safe future, and that his real family is built on love, not lies. As for me, I have learned what family truly means. It is not written in wills or secured by fortunes. It is not measured in houses or yachts. Family is a choice, a commitment to protect and to love, even when it is difficult. My son chose greed, and he lost everything. I chose truth, and though it cost me comfort, it gave me freedom. To those listening now, let my story remind you, betrayal can come from the people closest to you, but strength can also rise in places you least expect. Do not ignore the warning signs. Protect your dignity, protect your truth, and above all, protect the ones who cannot protect themselves. Thank you for sharing this time with me. If my story has moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need its message, and leave your own thoughts in the comments. We read every one of them, and your voice matters.